Welcome, everyone, on this rather chilly afternoon in Boston, wherever you may be. It's probably more than 26 degrees. But what an opportunity to warm our hearts and our minds and our eyes as we have a conversation about the work of Randy Johnston. The title, Written in Clay, resonates with me even more so after having read a book by Elif Shafak, a Turkish-born author who lives in London, called Here Are the Rivers in the Sky. And it references the discovery or rediscovery of tablets for the Gilgamesh epic that were written on cuneiform tablets that were written in clay. And coinciding with Randy's writing in clay, it's really quite a wonderful opportunity to reflect on clay as a fundamental part of our civilization, used differently in many places and many times. But in this instance, having an opportunity to have Randy and Chris, myself, and Caroline reflect on the work that's in the present collection is a real gift. And I'm delighted that all of you are with it to enjoy that. So let's begin with the cover of it, written in clay, and this wonderful kind of detail of the piece on the cover, which is the piece we'll look at first. Randy, I'm going to ask you if you don't mind, because this is a form that you have continued to evolve in your own artistic practice, to talk a bit about it. And I think we also have a photograph of the back side of it, so people will have a sense of the totality of your creation.
Well, thanks, Bertie. And first of all, I want to welcome everybody that's signed up for this and is watching. So welcome. And this piece grew out of a love and kind of a curious interest in a very common object, a spoon. And years ago, at your gallery, Bernie, I saw some South African spoon forms, and then we went to a museum and saw some wooden spoon forms. So I became very interested, like why spoons were made into ritual objects. And I began to explore this idea of a spoon. It become much more expansive. This is 2.5, 3 feet long when it's made. It contains an interior space. And I also introduced the idea of a nose form onto the piece, which I think I'm very interested in how it controls that interior space in the object. The copper glaze on this particular piece is something that I developed out of a very strong interest in Tang Dynasty bronzes. And I love the way that it begins to kind of define the surface and creates an ambiguity of interest in kind of the textures and the way that the edges of that form define the space.
Chris, your response to the piece?
Well, for me, one of the standout elements of this piece is how that copper glaze and its gradation from green to black and its integration with the form really reminds me of, we'll probably be talking about it, Randy's experience with wood firing. And it's an example of an artist who really reflects upon the voice of the material, be it glaze, be it clay, be it fire, and sort of balances how much control they an agency they put into it and how much they let the materials speak. It's very landscapish. It's a form that allows, for me, becomes a space to explore. And that's really exciting to me when we look at a three-dimensional object.
Caroline, your thoughts?
Well, I know a lot of people who are watching probably work in clay or are students of clay, and this piece reminds me that it's by no means a simple piece, but you don't have to do a backflip to really play with a form, where where Randy's added this nose piece, he's calling it. It's so simple, but it's really effective. And it does, I was thinking as Chris was talking about how it's kind of like a farmer plowing the field. You got like the tractor there in the middle. It's a very fun, playful piece, and you can really do a lot with very simple additions.
Let's look at the back of it if we can as well. It's important for many people who know Randy's work, and many of them have, be able to pick it up and look at how thoughtful the back itself is constructed, and also how the glaze movement, there's a sense of wind for both sides of it, from my point of view, that creates a surface movement visually. Randy, your thoughts about what has been said and the back of this piece?
Well, the backs are very important, and also it affects the overall posture of the piece. The piece is asymmetrical, and it cantilevers into space on as we're looking at this on the right side of that. So that cantilever has to be balanced in the way I set up the physical structures of the feet. And what the I mean, it seems maybe arbitrary at first when you begin to look at it, but the angles of those feet and the way they center on that piece with the center line all become important aspects of it. There are a lot of people who never look at the back of a piece of ceramics, but I remember looking at some of the early Islamic plates in museums and how decorated they were and how important. Chris used the word agency, but they become, very uh, directive in terms of an interest and also communicating information about the piece. But this cantilever up in space in the firing is very important. And Bernie, you're talking about the sense of wind on the piece. I love wind. I'm a sailor, and when I dip this particular glaze in, because it has a lot of metal oxides in it, they tend to flow in the structure of the glaze, and that is reinforced in the firing.
It is really
Ned
quite
was,
a, well,
I
go
think
ahead. Sorry.
Ned was the wise one to tell us to show the bottoms.
So Ned, you're a bottom man.
I am a bottom man. Thanks, Bernie. Yeah, I think well, you guys have really covered it well here. I mean, seeing the bottom of this pot, I love how that seam going horizontally across it becomes such a powerful feature in this way. And I think this is going to be a theme as we look through the pots that Randy has put together for this collection, how there's a lot of line work in them that guides your eye through the pots and breaks them up in certain ways. And what I really appreciate about that is I sort of consider that an invitation to take your time when you're looking through a pot, that you can consider each small part of the pot very deeply. And the way we've been talking about this copper green gradient moving towards that point here on the left side, and it's done so well. It's like that point has a gravity to it and everything's flowing that direction. That's really wonderful.
It's a perfect opportunity then to look at the next boat form piece, and to sense not only the change in glaze, but also the change in the sweep of this piece, the way that your eye is drawn to the left-hand side of the piece. And then the element, Randy, that you introduce in many of these pieces that are almost directional in the same piece. So in this case, Caroline, if you can respond to this, and we'll go from there.
I love when you can tell someone enjoys a form when they keep doing it over and over and over again. And it also shows you how you can just take simple changes and it just completely reconfigures the form into something new. This one has a totally different language, minus the color even from the wood ash. It has a totally different language than the previous piece, even though they're in the same wheelhouse. And I think that's what makes work fun, is when you can see an artist have a good time. And I mean, besides them just being these beautiful resisting that gravity while also being very heavy pieces and also very functional. I mean, I would want to use these on my table and show that off every Thanksgiving.
Well, you can use it more than just for Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Thank you for using the word joy, because one of the quotes that I had from Brother Thomas includes that. The difference between the process of art and the process of craft is that in art, the chief characteristic is joy. And it was interesting that even he was thinking about the process for himself, I think, as a maker, but also for us as those who appreciate it, that if that can be transmitted through an object made by someone else, then it's a real gift. Chris, your thoughts?
Well, I think what Caroline just said is really apt, and it reminds me of what Ned just said. There are these details that chain from piece to piece really, for me, demand a level of looking. It commands attention, and at the same time that it commands my attention, I'm thinking of the essay that was part of this catalog, and it talked about the power of stillness. And I think this is a really, these boat forms in general, but seeing these two one after another really demonstrate that. And I can't help but think about also the history of as the Unomi form and the T-bowl form traveled, through Europe and into the United States, how many of us were looking at these vehicle forms for expression and variation and looking for that joy. The vehicles for expressing joy, and it's nice to see that on these forms.
Absolutely. Randy?
Can you switch to the next slide on the bottom of this form? Yeah, so I dealt with the bottom of this in a different way, and the overall sense when you're making a piece and it's in a leather hard clay stage is to try to capture the nuances and touch and the sensibility of a line, and continue that tension and sensibility throughout the whole process, which is not always so easy, especially as forms get larger. But the color on this is always on the bottom side of wood fired pieces is always quite stunning, I think. And the other word I think describes this piece is the volume of it, and it's not captured maybe on a slide or just a photographic image, but as you see this piece in real life and are in its presence, I think you would pick up the sense of volume that it has. And I think of them as being sculptural and being structural also. And so there's many playful elements that I always try to allow myself to follow when I'm in the process of making them.
Ned, you're the bottom man.
I think in contrast to the previous spoon form we were looking at, I feel like it was sort of the base of that spoon form that was the highlight there, where the copper's flowing towards the base. And in this instance, the high point, it's on the right hand of the slide here, but if it was turned over, that high point is really the star, and you see quite a bit of wood ash collecting there and creeping over and funneling again towards a slab notch in the middle. And it's a variety within these shapes. Caroline mentioned the subtle differences between them. I have so much admiration for how Randy deals with the physics of these pots. And I think we've talked about Randy's ability to think about pottery architecturally, but the word that comes to mind for me is to think about it like an engineer. And it's an engineer, they're the people who have to figure out how thick, how robust something needs to be to support what weight. And all of that's so complex in an organic form like this. So I really love it.
It sounds like a wonderful. Go ahead, Randy.
One follow-up comment on, Ned is talking about the ash and the fire. And when, as an artist, you choose, if you're loading your own kiln, you choose kind of directional attitudes of the piece and give it the possibility of opportunity to respond to the fire that's going to pass over and under and through the piece. And, knowing from experience that the ash will lay down particular types of pathways, and that pathway will be recorded by the piece itself. So that's a kind of a fun, modernist, embracing chance opportunity to include with the making of the piece.
And also to be just a little bit in control, not a lot. Can we look at the next image, please? Just a whole different feeling with the Nuka glaze. But Randy, do you want to talk about the underglaze as well and your remembering it many years later after Shoji Hamada had mentioned it to you?
Yeah, one of my profound experiences at Hamada, and I was only 25 years old, was watching him glaze. And, I'd always been impressed by the power that his pieces had and still have to this day. But as I watched him, I began to realize that there wasn't just one glaze being added to the surface. There were sometimes 4 or 5 layers of information and glazing process that happened during the making and the glazing, the slipping of the piece. So this piece reflects that. It has the Nuka glaze on top, of course, and underneath that is a slip called Iron Man in honor of my grandson who loved Iron Man. But it's iron and manganese slip. And then there's some wax resist on that. And so the interaction of those two materials produces what they call nezumi, which is a mouse gray effect on pots captured in the old Mino pots, the old Mino Shino variety pots. In Japan, Bernie, this is a funny story, but for a long time I was saying in my rudimentary Japanese, I was saying Nezumi no Shino, and nobody ever corrected me. But finally, somebody told me, you're saying that it's the mouse's Shino.
Right, very nice. So it's good to have somebody correct you occasionally.
Yeah.
You want to talk about some of this graffiti on the side of it as well, and then we'll have others.
There's a lot of texture, of course, and then there's the wax resist, which is what probably looks like the white lines and the dark lines.
Right.
So after the piece is formed in bisque, and there's a rope pattern and press pattern in the interior of this piece, if you get up close to it. After it's bisque fired, I put wax resist on the piece and then dip it in the slip. And then I rebisque it, which burns the wax off. And then when the Nuka goes over that system, those lines appear to be white on the piece.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Okay, Ned, this is your opportunity to talk about an upside pot of a pot.
Well, I love I love the texture, the surface on the outside wall of a pot like this. It's just made to embrace the funk. That Nuka glaze, it's got some glossy areas, some crunchy areas, some pinholes. There's the wax resist lines, and there's just so much interest there. And then in contrast, you've got that much cleaner interior showing off the roped inlay, which is done so well. And of course, Randy's paid mind to keep the glaze thinner on the inside so that it doesn't get lost there. So yeah, but for me, I hope to. I'll certainly be at the opening of the exhibition. I hope to get my hands on the outside of that pot when I'm there.
One of the nice things with the gallery is that you're allowed to touch them. Caroline?
Most of Randy's pieces have one of my favorite aspects of ceramics, and that's forms that have a sense of breath to them. Even though this one's quite shallow and it's a platter, so it is wide and shallow, it still has everything slightly bowed out, like it's breathing in. That's one of my favorite things. And I'm focusing on all these tiny things about Randy's, but even that he's brought the rim is slightly in, how that just changes and gives a sense of protection like it's like a little sheepfold with those little feet and being white like snow. It's a really fun piece. There's a lot going on. You could endlessly, explore the outside and the inside and underneath.
It's also a piece that seems to me to invite you to use it, to not only explore it with your eyes and your spirit, but also to fill it with fruit, to fill it with objects, so that it adds a life to the container itself and adds to whatever you've put into it in such an extraordinary way. Let's look at the next piece, please. Chris, I'm going to ask you to start talking about this. Randy, there was a piece of yours that I think is like RJ32. So it goes back quite a number of years that you may have done at a firing with Chris. It was a square plate for sushi that yesterday was just spoken for. And it always reminds me that good work endures. It's then finding the right person for whom it can nourish. And it had the kind of dripping marks across it as well. It's really quite a wonderful piece. And it brings me great pleasure when something very early in our relationship is sold along with all of the very wonderful pieces that are still being made today. So let's have Chris's response to this, and then we'll move on to others.
I think I know the piece you're talking about, and I've certainly seen many of these forms over the years from Randy. And what I'm endlessly just infatuated with the fact that these have volume. You think of this as a flat piece of clay that was bent, and yet it has this incredible sense of fullness and volume. Not unlike what Caroline you were just speaking of with the last piece, or that's been said about the spoon forms. And there's a real art, in my opinion, there's a real art to getting a curve that's poetic and full and rich, and still at the very same time simple. And I haven't seen this one in real life, but I just, if you get a chance to see these forms, there's just this incredible confidence and poise to the interior space of these that I just can't get over. I love it.
So, Randy, I think you get an opportunity to respond to that compliment.
Well, I love that, Chris. And I remember at the workshop up in New Hampshire, I laid out a big sushi platter, and they're such a simple object, and yet they're so incredibly difficult in many ways to bring off as a successful piece of interest. And if you get up close to this, you would see that there's lots and lots of layers of clay added to just a big, thick, fat, juicy slab to begin with. And those layers are worked back and forth and worked back into. And I very often cite the idea of a painter putting down layers of paint, but very often they put down a black before they put down a white on a canvas, and it creates a different sensibility of the depth and the surface. And anyway, as I said, the most difficult thing is to make this piece a convincing piece in the end that has strong visual appeal. I love this particular piece, and the black trailing is something I learned from Hamada originally, and then from Shimoka, watching him trail the black Nagashi black trailing on pots. It's a wonderful way to paint and have a very fluid kind of line that reinforces all the layers underneath it.
It's really an extraordinary piece on so many levels. Ned, just a brief comment about maybe the edges.
I think there's a matching quality in nature, the undulation of the edges to the movement of the slip decoration, the trailing decoration. I think there's so much energy radiating from this piece. It's really powerful that way. I love a piece like this that shows off the maturity of a potter like Randy, who's been doing this for over 4 decades, where he talked about all that intention he put into the support and the shape and building out the piece. And that happens, and then a month goes by, and then you have the decorating process where you're trailing it, and it's this moment in time where you have to nail that technique, and it needs to be spontaneous. And if you hesitate there, it really just doesn't look right. And that just comes from years of doing it, and it really shows here that mature, confident decoration on a piece like this is really nice.
You sort of enabled me to find another of Thomas's quotes that I'd chosen and always figure out, should I really use it? I'm going to use it now. What we can do will eventually respond to what we dream we can do. And that would argue very strongly for every artist to continue to work every day at what they are creating, and no waiting for the muse to come and tap you on the shoulder and say, here it is today. And it didn't happen over the last 40 years. It's the process. Out of the work itself, the work emerges. And I think that that's what you were saying about this piece. And that's the feeling over the years that we've now worked together with Randy that I get as we receive new work that always seems like it has just freshly been invented by him, and yet it's a continuity of his own search. Next image, please. Caroline, this is really quite an extraordinary piece for you to begin talking about.
Oh, where do you start? I mean, it's really a breathtaking piece, and there's a whole lot going on here. This one has, even for the Nuka, has the crustiest, surface, and I think that's always really exciting in a pot, especially when you can pull it off and it doesn't overwhelm the piece. It speaks beautifully, this figure form, which of course Randy's titled it Figure Vase. This form, and then you have the touch of the hands, his finger marks there that gives this activation in the middle that really, I think, brings the whole thing together. I mean, it's just a beautiful form, and how something that you could just call white. Growing up myself in the desert, where it's like, oh, everything's just brown. It's like, no, there's all these colors in here, and when I look at this, I see a little bit of orange. I see some almost turquoise and green, especially around the rim. You have moments of black, but it has so much depth to it. It's a very fun piece.
So, a lovely tribute to the piece. Randy, I think it's your turn.
Well, thanks for that, Caroline. This is, I, I love this piece, and it can come back and live with me any day. What was interesting when this first came out of the wood firing, last year, last fall, it was a moment of disappointment. I was like, oh my God, this is so gnarly, and what am I going to do with this? And then it sat there with some other pieces, and I looked at it for a few days, and um, the other day I was thinking about, there are pieces out of even our recent wood firing that they come out, and at first they defy your ability to kind of interact with them in a positive way. And then you start to look at them, and you go, there's so much depth and beauty in this piece. And I'm going to say it's a piece, or these are pieces that you have to return and fight for as an artist. And as you interact with the surface, I remember days on end sitting at Shamoka's kiln rubbing pots that came out of a secret chamber, and they were all crusted with ash and gnarly, and you rub them and rub them and rub them with this rice straw rope, which is about 1,000 grit sandpaper. And after a couple days, they start to feel like a baby's butt, and they are just smooth, and the energy of the kiln is kind of reflected in the surface. So this is one of those. And I got another one out of a firing about a week ago, and I'm kind of looking at it and thinking, okay, I've got a few days to work on this surface, but I'm convinced after seeing this piece that it's going to respond in the same way.
It's rather extraordinary. Ned?
It has this breathtaking, ancient feel to it, which a lot of Randy's pots do, that they sort of seem like an artifact that you've unearthed. I love I love the really quiet lines in the background here that are sort of vertical and swirling a bit as you move up the pot. Um, maybe one thing I think is worth highlighting is the connection point, the seam in the middle. I love the thickness that Randy left there on that edge, and I think it's kind of a brave decision to leave a really robust rim or edge like that. And this gives me confidence to try that. It's like license to try that it can be so successful um, and satisfying. And that nature's complemented in the rim and the foot as well. I love how it works together.
Absolutely wonderful piece. Let's look at the next. And Chris, if you'd lead us into the two sides of the teapots, which Randy has done, I'm sure, for a very long time, but each one has its own character. So next slide, please.
Before we go to the next one, we actually have a viewer who wanted to ask Randy about if the copper green glaze, like on the sushi platter, if that's food safe.
Jay and I use it all the time, and it goes in and out of dishwashers, and I've never had it tested, so I don't know. I don't know why it wouldn't be food safe. It's high fired, cone 10, 11 stoner.
Good deal. Well, here's that piece for Chris.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think this teapot form is a really wonderful example of showing a balance. We talked about the simplicity of a lot of the forms that we've seen yet so far, and here you have a piece with multiple components, and there still seems to be this incredible balance and kind of quietness about it. And I think that one thing that maybe we all take for granted when we're looking at the work in this catalog and through Randy's career is there's a good eye for proportion, and simple things like positive and negative space. There's just a real command of composition, proportion, and editing in this piece for me.
Randy, you've done teapots for a while. Do you want to talk about your affection for them?
Well, they're a very complex form with, as Chris said, multiple components that all have to hopefully work together in the end. This pot starts off as a drawing, and then the drawing is turned into some paper patterns, and there's a top and a bottom part, and then the spout and the handle reflect my excitement and originally watching Matisse do his paper cutouts. And so all this work on this teapot, a lot of it starts off with a glass of wine and a coffee table in front of a fire at night, and cut, snip, 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 and then try the proportions, work out some details, and turn it into clay. And that's a fun part of the process. And some people say, well, why not just make it in clay? And for me, it's one of those pieces that I have to think about the proportions and kind of work things out before I start to interact with a pattern and turn it into a finished piece.
Carolyn, do you want to speak just a little bit about the two sides and the effect of the wood firing?
Well, you can see how dramatically different they are from side to side based on which side was facing the flame. And I love too how you can really see on the left-hand side where it was clearly getting the most ash, how it starts to become a little bit of a jacket. That starts to develop a thick glaze layer, and it changes that the different subtle touches in the clay, which thankfully is saved on the right-hand side. You can see a little seam there that is very quite delicate compared to the rest of the seams. That just is such a nice little difference from the other side. And it allows you to preserve some of that touch that can really be lost when you start adding surface accompaniments to pottery. And that's what's so much fun about the wood fire too, as well as just all the different play and color, and there's some almost crystallizing happening, and it's just a great piece to behold. And it's, I mean, you can make a teapot so much character. I mean, this one just has a personality all its own.
It's a lovely thing to say. Thomas wrote, art is only a means when there is something interior to share. And when there is not, it is not art, it's just another thing. So here we have a simple teapot that Randy has really enabled all of us to respond to as if it has a personality. Next slide, please. Just one of the you-know-me's. Many of you who have come to the gallery know that when you hold them, there's an indentation for your thumb. So it's as if it's inviting you to hold on to it and to use it. Randy, a little bit background of your affection for this particular shape and its history within your lifetime.
Well, I love Yunomis. You know, you is hot water and the verb nomi mas is to drink. And so it's a simple daily cup, but it can carry so much of the spirit and the intention and the touch of a maker. And that's one of the reasons I enjoy making them. Each one gets my individual touch and attention. They're like quick little sketches. And when I'm decorating them, I might just kind of get into a stream of consciousness with the decoration and the process, and just very casually but with great intention move through that decorating process for the pieces. And I, you know, hope that people enjoy them for hot water, tea, Jameson, wine, anything they want to put in them.
Wanted to make sure you didn't leave
Yeah.
Jameson out.
Yeah.
Would you talk a little just simply about the design on this and how you had it come into being?
The
Brushwork.
yeah, the brushwork. There's probably there's at least 3 layers of brushwork, Iron Man slip, which is kind of the rusty brown underneath. Then on top of that, there's more brushwork with iron, and very often there's 2 or 3 layers of different kinds of chino. And by different kinds of chino, I mean chinos that typically will melt at slightly different temperatures, and therefore they create different opacity. And some are over and under the iron decoration, and that's not totally my idea. I saw in Mino pots during the Momoyama period, you see sometimes like an iron line emerging from underneath the chino, and it's like, how did they do that? And you look at it carefully and you realize that they decorated it with the iron on top of another chino, and then they put the chino on top of that. And so that opened up some possibilities in my thinking process towards like, gee, let's try that, and how does it work? And you, again, back to Hamada, you start developing layers of information on the piece that is quite a simple piece indirectly, but it trying a new word out here. It just kind of challenges your acceptance of spontaneity and ambiguity. You know, that's there's so many different layers and ways of looking at this as you hold it and turn it. It's not a ceremonial tea bowl, but it's just a simple cup that you hold in your hand, inviting conversation with people.
Ned, your turn.
That orange color is stunning. I love that orange blush coming from that chino. And you know, Randy talked about all that decoration, the layers built up there, and the result is such a rich surface. There's crawling happening. I was kind of imagining that I think this is the type of pot you could put your hands up and sort of visually crop out like a 1 inch by 1 inch section of this pot on a tiny sort of humble, you know, I mean, you could take that 1 inch by 1 inch section, blow it up on a massive canvas, hang it at your house, and it would be a dynamic, really interesting composition to enjoy. So it's just, you know, so much interest loaded up into such a tiny, humble object, which is
So if you do that, please leave a copyright underneath it and credit to the artist in the
Okay.
gallery. Next image, please. Wonderful, wonderful. Chris?
This makes me think of the first form with that beautiful copper green and the gradation. And here, to me, it's watching an artist sort of follow a theme and translate it here with monochromatic, but using light and tone as a way to show that gradation and show off the sculptural quality and the volume. This piece is, I think this piece is really stunning and shows a tremendous amount of confidence and restraint by a maker. It's a wonderful glaze, and it's not a glaze I'm very familiar with, Randy, with you using. Is this new?
A fairly new glaze. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
So one of the joys of these opportunities is a single image in front of you and letting your eyes essentially hold the piece. This particular one has all that simplicity of form, the line moving vertically and horizontally, moving in on itself at certain points, coming out at another point. Then as you look simply the way it was photographed, and I don't just absolutely lovely where you're seeing the backside of the rim at the same time, and it's all slightly undulating across it. It's an absolutely beautiful piece, Randy, and simple, and at the same time beautiful. I think one comes to this point in their career after having done many, many years of creation, and then something simple happens that in a way summarizes so much that's gone on before. It's really very, very beautiful. And it's a joy just to simply sit here and look at it in such a meaningful way. The next slide allows us to have a somewhat similar form with two very different treatments. They're going to different proms and they're outfitted differently. And Randy, do you want to talk about the two? And then we'll have some other thoughts as well.
These are, two very elegant, I'm going to use the word elegant for
Right.
me. And Carolyn used the word breadth, and they have a lot of breadth. So they're made from slabs from a pattern, and they have a rounded elevated foot structure. And as you put these four slabs together, what I'm playing with are the length and the width of the darts that uh, will generate curvature in the pieces. And so I'm controlling where the volume occurs and the taper and the stance that the pieces have simply by this taking different dart structures out of the piece. I call them amulets with the amulets on the pieces. Those are very considered and very thought out, and placing those or just playing with where you place them on the piece and how it changes the character or the attitude of the piece is quite fun. Sometimes it's just make them and you can kind of stick wet clay on wet clay a little bit without fastening it, and you look at it and step back and spin it around and look at it, consider it. The horizontal line divisions
Up here.
are
And
also
the whole
quite,
screen. How do I get the whole screen back at the end?
yeah, the horizontal lines are quite important on these pieces
Oh,
also.
wait. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much. My image changed and they went to the prom and left me with no image on my screen.
Oh,
They're now back. So thank you for saying that. Caroline, do you want to talk about these two pieces?
I would love to. Besides how keep talking about how something so similar can be so different. I love how the piece that is green compared to the nuka actually in an abstract sense looks so much more like a grassy field, even though it's white, and that it doesn't have to be one for one. They're really just beautiful I mean, they're more abstract than a painting in that sense. I mean, they're both just so much fun, and how I love how Randy has like so many layers. He's so expertly done it. You wouldn't think that there's 3, 4, sometimes more layers in a piece, and that's when it looks effortless. that's when you know it's the work of someone who is keen and knows what they're doing.
Ned, do you want to talk about the placement of the little triangulated form on both of the two pieces and then the waistband on both of them and contrast them if you would?
Well, they're directing your eye, and I think it's a very nice way to break up a piece, not in the middle, but sort of by a third, sort of a third at the bottom and two-thirds on top. I think if I if I can pause for a moment and talk a little bit about the surface of the clay on this pot. In particular, we can see it on the copper glaze pot, but it's just the way that Randy is able to consistently leave that slightly mottled texture and surface, no matter what the shape of the pot is, how large or small it is so it's so attractive and compelling. And I it reminds me, if you're fortunate enough to meet Randy, he's a extremely welcoming, generous person. And we think about the maker when we think about a pot, and his pots communicate that. It's almost like a bond of trust that you have, where if it's a pot that's Randy's made, you know that you're going to be able to close your eyes and glide your hand over it, and you're not going to get bit by a sharp edge. And there's going to be so much surface there to discover and to appreciate. And it's so difficult to do. Again, from my perspective, coming from a teaching studio, hand-built pots take longer, undoubtedly. And then often after you've spent all that time to make a hand-built pot, my students will say that they take double that time, that amount of time again to go and try and finish all the seams and make all of the seams work. And they just don't look as good when you rework them that way anyway. So it's so expertly done, and it's so inviting. And it's so appreciated. So.
That's a lovely tribute. I just want to make sure Randy the Jan's okay with people sort of fondling you.
Should pay him for it.
Let's go to the next image. This Randy comes out directly out of the meat trays and food containers. It's really, really quite beautiful. And the way that you've then personalized it is extraordinary.
Well, the African meat trays, Bernie, that you're referring to, the South African ones, were sort of the premise for thinking about these pieces. And also there's a sculptural piece by Giacometti called Spoon Woman, which is a very powerful piece in my sort of influence for these. They become very playful and in their figurative aspect also, not just serving a food sustenance for a village or a community, but they become figurative. And so I'm playing around a lot with the juxtaposition of the two opposing forms, how they come together, the shapes of the top versus the bottom one, and then the tabs, and then the placement in the kiln. And in this case, it's wood fired, so there's a very large shell placed on the piece to mask off where the wood ash does not interact with the slip underneath, and then the directional placement so that center fin or island casts a shadow onto the piece on the right side. So those are kind of the two aspects that I'm playing with on this piece, and it's fun. I like it.
I like it very much. Chris?
I'm very struck with when you have, I've seen these forms for a while, and watching them evolve has been exciting. And I'm very struck when you see two volumes that interact. It makes me think, I don't know if you know the Arte Povera movement, where they had these marble busts that were looking at each other. And as a viewer, it was like you were watching a conversation, and, were you invited in? And I can't help but think about this on my table with what would I put in there on either side, and what would that conversation be, and what the effect of that would be with, who's using this. There's something really compelling to me about these two volumes, not just next to each other, but the same form but distinctly different. It's very compelling.
Caroline, you've seen some of the meat trays here in the gallery, and how do you respond to this piece in relation to the experience of the Zulu pieces?
Oh, well, even during practice, I guess it's reminding me of this one specific meat tray that I love so much. And it's funny because I think it's carved before the wood's really seasoned and dry. And it is kind of, or maybe it's just from being used so much, it's kind of warped a little bit. It's one of my favorite meat trays. It's beautiful. And this one reminds me so much of it. Just a beautiful serving platter. And this one has become really kind of leathery brown and kind of looks like it's been, aged over time. Just, of course, wood fire will do that. But it really speaks so much to those meat trays that are just so fun.
Wonderful. Wonderful way to see both the meat trays and to then see this afresh. Next image, please. Randy, you want to speak a bit about this? This has this kind of iconic presence and dignity, I would say, to it. But how do you relate to it?
Well, it has a very strong figurative presence for me, and I believe I call them figure vases. And the original premise was years ago. I was looking at cycladic figures, and I love the shape of the legs and the torso. And then I flipped the leg and the torso upside down, so the hips are on the bottom, and the foot would be the waist structure of it. But also the reductivism that takes place on those forms and in this form too, where you reduce the piece to essential elements and a very gestural but structural line and element. And it's oval, it's not round, so it's flattened form. And flattening forms into an oval format has been something I'll use the word chased. I've chased after that idea for many, many years. I like the idea that it changes the aspect sensibility of the piece. And this piece has a chino glaze on the upper part and a black iron slip on the bottom. And I love the way uh, something happened in the wood firing that it masked off that one area of the piece and got that orange mark.
Caroline, just a thought.
Well, I think the use of the black really gives another layer and kind of lifts up what could kind of become a piece that has a lot of language from the wood firing, and it gives this satin between, you have a little bit of matte, you have shine, and you have the satin all in this one piece. It gives a lot of depth to the surface. It's really beautiful.
Lovely. Let's move to the next one where there's a similar kind of dark and light here with this one. Randy, I'd like for you to talk a bit about how you both thought about this form with the almost square part in the center and then the little emphasis of the small piece on the left.
Well, it's a very simple bowl in its intention. But then, one of the questions we all ask as artists is how do we personalize it? How do we make it suggestive of ourselves and also address what I would call universal elements of humanity? And the little appendage in it is a mark that is an identifier. And then I've been playing around with ideas of how to divide up that interior surface so it's not sometimes just a simple surface with wood ash in it is beautiful, and other times in this I've juxtaposed this idea of a square, and it's not, if you look at the corners of it, it's not quite square. I intended to overlap in that little structural visual element on the ends. I look a lot at membranous American, Native American pots, and I love the simplicity of the bowl, but then the way they've so articulated the anthropomorphic and the geometric patterns that they imposed on the piece, and just what power that carries. So, this I love this piece. It's simple, but it's again, it embraces a number of ambiguities that I keep returning to.
Ned, your thoughts?
I, I like tracking around that dark iron interior space there. I love tracking around it, and those little overlaps you mentioned, Randy, they look like arrows sort of guiding you around, and then you come to that added sort of sprigged arrow pointing you to the middle. And then I didn't even notice this about the piece at first, and correct me if I'm wrong, Randy, but it looks like there's a shell mark that it had a shell mark, and it's so quiet and it's hidden there, but it works really well with the rest of the piece, and the lines in it kind of complement that added arrow and those overlapping arrows. And I just thought I thought what a remarkable way to use that shell there, in contrast to, we saw that double spoon form where the shell mark is casting this striking highlight on the pot. And then here it's kind of this hidden treasure to discover in the middle.
Thank you.
So is there a shell mark there or not?
There is a shell mark.
Okay.
And,
I just wanted Ned to be right.
he's right. It's,
Okay.
it's the Iron Man slip, and then the beauty of that slip in the wood fire, and especially in a horizontal format or more horizontal format, is the way the different qualities of ash lay down on it, and how it's kind of a very interesting brown, reddish brown color.
One of the goals of these conversations is to help all of us learn better how to look and therefore to see. And I think, Ned, by pointing that out, Randy, by your comments, it's just another way of saying that's what one can do if the work itself is rich enough to also give you something back. And certainly Randy's work is that. So we're moving to the last piece, which is one that I like very, very much. And I'm going to ask Caroline to begin, and then each one of us can respond to it.
I think this form really complements this matte black glaze very well. It looks like if it's a different thickness, it can become matte to a little bit more shine and satin, which just gives extra depth to all the hard work Randy's done to develop the surface of the texture of the clay. And it hasn't, just covered it up like a jacket. It really interacts and marries well with the front of the form. And it doesn't make it flat in any way, even though it is one singular color.
Chris, your thoughts?
It makes me think of the seams that we've seen, where Randy often will let the seam speak and have a voice. And here it's almost as if these aren't necessarily seams, but those seams have evolved into a surface that really sings, and sings really well with that black glaze. And I think, given the last couple of slides, there's a real interesting relationship, I think, Randy, you have with symmetry. It's sort of acknowledging symmetry, but also really sort of forcing the issue of that slow looking that you're talking about, Bernie, and like, it's not totally symmetrical, and you just have to exist with it. And it's quite elegant, quite elegant.
Thank you.
And Ned?
I mean, the texture on this piece is so nice, the thick texture there. I guess I would point out in a different context, to glaze a large pot like this all in a black glaze, you could almost risk the pot feeling a little bit imposing or ominous, and you don't get any of that here. It's another instance of a pot that feels warm and it feels inviting, and again, that's just more credit to Randy's treatment of the surface of the clay.
Randy?
Well, there's a number of things going on with this spot, and I thank everybody for the compliments and the observations of this piece. There is a tremendous, real heavy texture, and I've actually photographed this piece as I was making it, and I'm the pastiche. I'm going to call it pastiche, but there's elements of glaze, clay added to the surface that is, from my experience in Italy, seeing the old walls that are plastered over and plastered over again, and there's some stone coming out underneath them and some arches and different colors, and that's kind of where this idea originated, from that experience. And the I the black glaze isn't meant to smother, but it's meant to really enhance that piece without destroying. If I painted a whole bunch of decoration on it or something, I think it might confuse the piece. It's also intended for me specifically for flowers or ikebana arrangements. And so I'm gonna, as I visualize that, I'm looking at abstract and asymmetrical, maybe branches or uh, cherry or apple blossoms coming out of it with some irises or something like that. So I can envision, daffodils, yellow color, green colors with that. And um, when I courted Jan, I gave her some black plates, and she's like, "Why are you giving me black plates? Black food looks horrible on black plates." And I said, "Have you ever really tried a black plate with food on it, the greens and the reds and the tomato sauce or something like that? How stunningly beautiful it can be." So that's kind of the intention I have for this piece, is that it's made to receive flowers and some kind of arrangement. And the black glaze is, if you look at that glaze really carefully, it's not really black. It's got some, one of the things I've been playing with Chris with it is iron chromate, which is got a little bit of a reddish iron chrome green structure to it. So when you get it in sunlight, it has some amazing color to it.
First and foremost, want to thank everyone for participating, everyone for listening, and end with a quote again with Thomas and a question, I think. We all share a creative goal with art. The goal is difficult. It is an invitation to change the world. And for me, the opportunity to sit and look at these pieces, Randy, with you and with Ned, with Caroline, and with Chris, is one of those moments where you feel that your art can, in fact, change the world, because it enables us to see the best in who we are. And that's a real gift to all of us. So thank you for having written in clay.